Conflict theory is the second major theoretical perspective, and you can think of it as paired with functionalism. Functionalism did a good job laying out the foundations of society, what are the parts of society, form, function, all of that. Conflict theory is coming around saying, thank you, but at the same time, stability is not always the best end game, because you can have remarkably stable systems that are highly, highly unequal. If you think about slave systems and caste systems especially, they may be stable, but that stability is based on very highly disastrous inequality in between groups. So conflict theory is really in search of that inequality in power structures in society. Some of the old dead guys of conflict theory: Karl Marx, surprise, surprise, Max Weber, and if you guys remember Georg Simmel, he is the life choices, life chances guy. The idea that it is the structures that guide our decisions and choices more so than our own individual wants and needs. So he is also part of conflict theory. And conflict is not just fighting. It can be war. You can have outright killing and annihilation of one group that has power over another group. But it could also be indifferencing to the suffering or indifference to the suffering of others. The completely ignoring homelessness or completely ignoring the children in cages, that type of thing. So it's not just war. Conflict may not be the best name for this because we have a tendency to think fight, fight, fight. But it's more of a power. Who has the power to ignore? Who has the privilege to not care about the news? That kind of thing. And who are the ones that are caught up in everyday suffering every single day? So the definitions of conflict theory start an awful lot sounding like Karl Marx here. Institutions are in conflict over power and resources. Institutions have inequality inside and between. If you think about classrooms inequality, of course, I'm the grade giver, so there is inherent built-in inequality. But if you also think about between institutions, my dad was a career Army man, and we used to argue because you could always find money for war, right? Even looking at the coronavirus stuff right now, if they want to give money to the military, well, they just say, okay, military, $27 gazillion, because of course we have to do it. But if we want to give people money or save the post office or keep people from being evicted from their houses, we don't have any money for that, right? Our society doesn't automatically cough up the money for the things that we don't think are important, or we as a society or the people in power in society don't think are important. So we look for things like the dominant and subordinate groups, and then especially the ways in which the dominant group maintains their dominance over time. If you have dramatic inequality within your society, why is everybody okay with that? Why do people vote against their self-interest? So all of those kind of ideas. And Karl Marx looks at ideology and mythology and how we as a society tell our stories. And those stories that we tell about ourselves reinforce the inequalities that we have and make them sound like, of course, this is the way it should be. We should have 2 or 3 guys that can own all of us 50,000 times over, and then the rest of us not doing so good. It's of course we should, because it's America. So conflict theory is going to look at that, the way the dominant subordinate groups are formed, how they're defined, and then again, how the dominant group maintains their dominance over time. If you have a minute, go on YouTube and look up The Sneetches, a Dr. Seuss piece from the 1960s. It does a really good job showing a highly unequal system, and it also shows the training. It's not just that the system is unequal, but that we have to treat the children how to treat people that are different from you. If you treat people the same as you in one way, you treat these other people in an entirely different way. So it does a really good job showing that socialization aspect of inequality. So if we're thinking about how problems arise according to a conflict theorist, it's differences in power, right? People have different ideas about how the world works, and people with power get to tell their story, in a sense. Differences of power and values. Powerful people can influence major institutions. They can decide what the problems are. They can decide what are the important issues right now. And they can also shift blame around to those groups who cannot defend themselves. Either no money to defend themselves, no social power to defend themselves, but it's all their fault. And you see that a lot, especially now. So I could go on for like another 25 minutes on this slide. But yeah, powerful people can influence institutions. Watch the news, and especially watch different news sources, and see how the stories are different. See what the different sides, political sides, say, this is the important thing today. So powerful people can influence what stories get told. So how do you solve problems if you're a conflict theorist? It's a little hard. Give power to people. Well, how do you give power to people? The biggest thing we can do is create social movements, right? So social movements are one of the very, very, very few things that human beings in groups can do to influence higher power structures. And the more noise you make and the more conflict you cause, the more people will care. And we've seen a lot of this happen over the summer. So lots of protests over the summer, lots of social movements arising over the summer, and trying to grab some power back that we see happening over the summer, because summer power is not going to be given necessarily. There's very few situations in which power is given. And one example of that would be like the Civil Rights Act, which was given, but after protests. So it was a piece of legislation that said you now have the power to enter these areas. But that power wasn't given until the protests happened. So it's kind of a give and take. So the protests are what have to happen oftentimes before the power is let go of just a little bit by the people in charge.